The 1930s, the Soviet Union. After investigation reveals that some members of the former Bolshevik Party question Stalin's authority, and that there is a network of party members supposedly working against him, Stalin believes anyone with ties to the Bolsheviks or Lenin's government is a threat to his leadership and needs to go. He initiates the Great Purge, which starts with the arrests of party members, Bolsheviks, and members of the Red Army, and then grows to include Soviet peasants, members of the intelligentsia, and members of certain nationalities. By 1938, however, the oppression has become so extensive that it is damaging the infrastructure, economy, and even the armed forces of the Soviet state, prompting Stalin to wind the purge down. In November 1938, Lavrentiy Beria succeeds Nikolai Yezhov as the head of the NKVD, the Interior Ministry of the Soviet Union, which coordinated the purge. Though Beria's appointment marks an easing of the repression begun under Yezhov, the liberalization is only relative as arrests, torture, and executions continue. Soon, Beria promotes new officers who will become notorious for brutally torturing prisoners during interrogations. One of them is Lev Shvartzman. Lev Leonidovich Aronovich Shvartzman, the son of a Jewish bank official, was born on the 25th of July, 1907 in Ukrainian Shpola, then part of the Russian Empire. 10 years later, during the February Revolution in 1917, the Russian monarchy ended with the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, and Russia was in a state of political flux. A tense summer culminated in the Bolshevik-led October Revolution and overthrowing the provincial government of the new Russian Republic. However, Bolshevik seizure of power was not universally accepted, and the country descended into civil war. The two largest combatants were the Red Army, fighting for the establishment of a Bolshevik-led socialist state headed by Vladimir Lenin, and the loosely allied forces known as the White Army, which functioned as a political big tent for right and left-wing opposition to Bolshevik rule. By the start of 1920, the White Armies were defeated. During the Russian Civil War, Shvartzman's parents supported the White Army against the Bolsheviks. While his father served in the army of General Nikolai Yudenich and was killed in battle in 1919, his mother served as a military doctor. Despite his family's background, Shvartzman, who left school at 14, was allowed to join the Komsomol in 1925. Komsomol was a political youth organization in the Soviet Union. Having worked as a newspaper seller, he was taken on as a reporter in Kiev, and in February 1929 was transferred to Moscow to work for the newspaper Moskovsky Komsomolets. In 1935, Shvartzman was recruited to the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the infamous NKVD, the ministry which oversaw the state security and police forces. At this time, NKVD was headed by Genrikh Yagoda. In March 1937, Yagoda was arrested on Stalin's orders. At this time, the NKVD was headed by Nikolai Yezhov, who had replaced Yagoda 1 year earlier. Under Nikolai Yezhov, the organization carried out the Great Purge, which was the imprisonment or execution of a huge number, possibly over 1 million, of citizens throughout the Soviet Union as alleged enemies of the people, between August 1936 and March 1938. By 1938, however, the oppression had become so extensive that it was damaging the infrastructure, economy, and even the armed forces of the Soviet state, prompting Stalin to wind the purge down. It was during this Great Purge that Shvartzman's career rapidly advanced. In November 1938, Yezhov was succeeded by Lavrentiy Beria as NKVD head, easing of the repression that had begun under Yezhov. The government officially admitted that there had been some injustice and excesses during the purges, which were blamed entirely on Yezhov, and over 100,000 people were released from the labor camps. But the liberalization was only relative, as arrests, torture, and executions continued. In NKVD, Shvartzman was first put in charge of investigating writers, artists, and publishers, but was considered ineffective, so was given the job of intensive investigations, which meant that during interrogations he would turn into a sadistic torturer, forcing confessions out of the prisoners, no matter if they were true or not. Among those who were interrogated and tortured by Shvartzman was the former head of Komsomol, Aleksandr Kosarev, and his former deputy, Valentina Pikina. Despite being severely beaten with rubber truncheons, put through a fake execution, and raped by Shvartzman and his colleague Boris Rodos, Pikina refused to sign a confession. Shvartzman also interrogated Vasily Blyukher, a Soviet military commander and marshal of the Soviet Union, who was accused of helping a Japanese spy. Unlike most prisoners subjected to Shvartzman's torture, he did not sign a false confession, but on the 9th of November 1938, after 18 days of torture, he died from his injuries. A former officer who had seen Blyukher while he was under interrogation said that his whole face was swollen and covered with bruises. Another so-called enemy of the people was Vsevolod Meyerhold, a theatre director, actor, and theatrical producer of German descent, who was one of the seminal forces in modern international theatre. On the 17th of June, 1939, Meyerhold addressed a conference of theatre directors in the presence of Andrei Vyshinsky, the state prosecutor who had presided over the infamous Moscow show trials. During this conference, he criticized the regime. He was arrested 3 days later and wrote an account shortly before his execution of how he was tortured by Shvartzman. Meyerhold wrote, "The investigators began to use force on me, a sick, 65-year-old man. I was made to lie down and beaten on the soles of my feet and my spine with a rubber strap. They sat me on a chair and beat my feet from above with considerable force. For the next few days, when those parts of my legs were covered with extensive internal hemorrhaging, they again beat the red, blue, and yellow bruises with a strap, and the pain was so intense that it felt as if boiling water was being poured on these sensitive areas. I howled and wept from the pain. They beat my back with the same rubber strap and punched my face, swinging their fists from a great height. The intolerable physical and emotional pain caused my eyes to weep unending streams of tears. Laying face down on the floor, I discovered that I could wriggle, twist, and squeal like a dog when its master whipped it." Meyerhold was executed on the 2nd of February, 1940. Isaac Babel, a Soviet writer, journalist, and playwright, acclaimed as the greatest prose writer of Russian Jewry, was also arrested by the NKVD in 1939 on fabricated charges of terrorism and espionage. At first, Babel denied any wrongdoing, but after 3 days he suddenly confessed to what his interrogator was suggesting and named many people as co-conspirators. The interrogator was Lev Shvartzman, and he beat and tortured Babel, who was executed on the 27th of January, 1940. In March 1940, Shvartzman was posted to Vyborg, which had just been seized during the Soviet-Finnish War and incorporated into the Soviet Union. In this newly captured territory, he was charged with creating an NKVD department. In February 1941, Shvartzman was appointed deputy head of the NKGB, Investigation Department of the Soviet Union. NKGB, or the People's Commissariat for State Security, was the name of the Soviet secret police, intelligence, and counterintelligence force that existed from the 3rd of February to the 20th of July 1941, and again in 1943, before being renamed to the Ministry of State Security, or the MGB. However, this promotion did not mean that he stopped torturing those whom he interrogated. When the highly decorated Red Army officer, Grigory Shtern, was arrested in June 1941 and brought before Shvartzman's boss, Vsevolod Meyerhold, for interrogation, Shvartzman hit him with an electric cable with such force that it severed his right eye. Shvartzman immediately apologized to Meyerhold for the blood that had spilt on the carpet. Shtern, unable to bear the pain, signed a false confession that he had belonged to a Trotskyist conspiracy within the Red Army from 1931, and that he was a German spy. He was shot without trial on the 28th of October, 1941. From August 1941, Shvartzman was deputy head of the MGB Investigation Department of the Soviet Union, of special importance, and on the 14th of February 1943, he was raised to the rank of Colonel of State Security. On the 13th of July, 1951, Viktor Abakumov, head of the MGB, was arrested. Lev Shvartzman was arrested 1 day later. Both arrests were products of Joseph Stalin's suspicion that there was a Jewish plot against him, inspired by the creation of the State of Israel. Abakumov had failed to take seriously the case being put together by his subordinate, Mikhail Ryumin, which became known as the Doctor's Plot. This plot was a Soviet state-sponsored anti-Semitic campaign and conspiracy theory that alleged a cabal of prominent medical specialists, predominantly of Jewish ethnicity, intended to murder leading government and party officials. Many doctors, both Jews and non-Jews, were dismissed from their jobs, arrested, and tortured to produce admissions. Abakumov was charged with being a sympathizer and protector of the criminal Jewish underground. His arrest was followed by the arrests of many agents who worked for him in the central apparatus of the MGB, including most Jews such as Lev Shvartzman, who was the highest-ranking Jewish officer in the MGB and the first of many to be arrested. Under interrogation, Shvartzman confessed to being a Jewish nationalist and the linchpin of a terrorist organization, organized with the connivance of Abakumov, made up of every senior Jewish officer in the security forces. The former MGB officer, Pavel Sudoplatov, said the following: Shvartzman also confessed to having homosexual relations with Abakumov, his son, and the British ambassador. In addition, Shvartzman confessed that he had used homosexual contacts with American double agents to pass orders for terrorist actions to Jewish conspirators. He invented unbelievable stories, like being inspired in his terrorist activities by drinking Zionist soup prepared by his Jewish aunt, or sleeping with his stepdaughter, or having homosexual relations with his son. This would make him an incestuous father and homosexual pedophile. After Stalin's death, the Doctor's Plot was exposed as a fabrication, and Lavrenti Beria, who had regained control of the security forces, offered Shvartzman a deal that if he admitted extracting false confessions under torture, the charge of being a Zionist conspirator would be dropped and he would receive a prison sentence. However, after Beria's own downfall, the offer was withdrawn. On the 3rd of March, 1955, Shvartzman was sentenced to death. And after the Presidium of the Soviet Supreme Council rejected a request for pardon, he was executed on the 13th of May, 1955, at the age of 47. There were no tears shed for Lev Shvartzman.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.